Hi everyone, welcome to an Eximius Executive show. We are going to be touching on some topics that you have selected for us, and there's been a theme over the last week around discernment and what that means to people and how that's impacting the world. I'm so happy to have Tom Pickering join us today. Tom is a turnaround specialist, a scale-up specialist. He's helped over 200 businesses move through some incredibly troubled times and help scale business up there. Tom has agreed to jump on a call to cover this tricky topic as well and understand what it means to him. So Tom, as we kick off, discernment, what does it actually mean to you?
I think that discernment means when we are faced with a challenge, what do we think is the right thing to do?
Right. Okay. And how have you seen people tackle and take this on at the moment? You know, from a starting point, because obviously a lot of people are facing these issues right now.
Yeah. Well, when I think back, Nick, I was just it's good to think about this sort of before and after. I think from my perspective, I think when I look back through my career, there's some pretty simple criteria which determined what people should do, which I think have dramatically changed over the last 12 months for sure. And so, for example, things like growth is still a mantra that's around. Things like improving service and profitability was fairly straightforward things, but I think they really do need to be challenged. And I think things are a lot more, I wouldn't say sophisticated, but a lot more basic. And so I think the main thing is actually what are the assumptions, okay, that we make when we're making decisions. So a lot of this is around our dialogue, around technology. So a lot of CEOs, for example, are implementing technology. And I listen, I'm very closely involved with various different types of forums that talk about technology. And people make statements like AI for good or ethical AI. And what gives rise is a dialogue around that, but it's very difficult to challenge. And it gives rise to discussions that because humans are flawed or thought to be flawed, machines somehow can be less biased than than people, which is utterly ridiculous because technology 100% relies on bias. It identifies trends to predict the future, which of course is driven by bias. So the notion that, if you listen to these technology discussions, it's all around that sort of stuff, which is what I describe as being quite a big misalignment. I think the other thing is around, some of the woke culture that we're faced with in terms of driving certain types of decision making around a reluctance to engage in difficult conversations as well. So I think these are the sorts of things which are driving people, Nick, but I don't think we're necessarily aware of how this is actually taking our eye off the ball.
Yeah, and I think the fearing difficult conversations bit, is that something you see? Is that the most prevalent thing you see at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. I think with the if you take a really provocative discussion, and you and I have talked about this, like the value of Bitcoin, for example, okay? I intentionally put the cat in the pigeons, and I actually use the reverse of because it's provocative to use a generalization, okay, that around the value of Bitcoin. And if you technically look at Bitcoin, you're actually investing in pretty much nothing. There's a process behind it, but actually what you're investing in is pretty much nothing. And yet, the responses are interesting. So the dialogue really matters. So people will label X, Y, Z, which of course I understand that dialogue and I know how not to take that personally. So it doesn't wind me up. But if you do respond to it, you'll get into a fight, right? Because you get generalization versus generalization and no productive dialogue. And I think the other thing as well is it's easy to be self-righteous in these situations. I'll give you a stupid example where I was driving my daughter to school the other day and someone pulled out in front of me, Nick, right? And I thought, that's ridiculous. But what I didn't realize was I'd left my left-hand indicator on.
Oh, right.
Having dropped her off at the side of the road. But my initial reaction was, I was right. Why have you just pulled out in front of me? But of course, then I went past this guy and I had so I think it's very easy to be self-righteous. So when we're having these dialogues, whilst we may be confident that we may be right or wrong, for whatever reason, actually we need to go in with an open mind and a bit of humility.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, but from how do you usually advise people taking those sort of first steps to putting on the table? Is it just, you've got to just bite the bullet and put it out there?
Well, as you're probably aware, Nick, I mean, you and I know each other pretty well now, and I encourage open dialogue, right? And so I like to try and model this, and sometimes I can exaggerate to make the point, but I think it's really about encouraging people to be open and truthful about what they're saying, and to say things they would never have the courage. And I try to demonstrate that, because, you know, if you look at online, there's a lot of fear, and it's actually to say bad things online, and it isn't naturally forthcoming. I think as well, it's all about relationships as well. So what's our perspective? What does good look like? It is about maintaining relationships, and actually good relationships, Nick, I think, are about really taking an interest in Nick or an interest in Tom, his views, acknowledging us for who we are, and actually really taking interest in really understanding where people are coming from. And of course, in this environment where people are fearful, that's less likely, Nick. So again, I think that comes down to really what's in the back of my mind when it comes to decision making, really thinking what actually is the level playing field. And I think it's relationships and profit. So that's the relationship. In terms of profit, I think that's about about understanding your core business, which a lot of businesses take for granted. But profit really matters because it gives you the freedom to do what you want to do. And if you stop making profit, then someone else comes and takes your bacon. It's that simple. So those two factors really are the key to giving you the freedom and being able to manage relationships in a productive sort of way.
And in your when you got your turnaround hat on and you're going into business, how often are you the reality check guy who actually delivers the facts?
Well, I'm the person that enables the business to get to the facts, Nick. So in creating the open dialogue, everything comes out on the table. And so I will make it safe. I'll create an amnesty, okay, to say, look, you know, I'm from this point, well, I need to know everything that's going on in the business, and no one will be criticized for that. But there's a sort of amnesty on what's happened in the past, notwithstanding sometimes you can come across illegal situations, Nick, but by and large, that's the, and then from that point, we're now going to do things right. And we're now going to, you know, be very open with each other. We're going to maintain open dialogue in a very imperfect sort of way. And I'll run reviews. So, you know, if something obviously doesn't make sense, very often people will not have the confidence to challenge somebody else. But I will stop a discussion. I'll say something like, well, Nick, hold on a minute, that doesn't make sense to me. Can you just explain that? And I will, or I might say to you, Nick, if you're the boss, to say, I might say, actually, you might be speaking to another member of your team, and I might say, well, what do you think about what Nick just said, right? Knowing that, you know, and if they don't have the confidence, I'll say, well, then I'll give them the opportunity just to get people to step over the edge, Nick, to have that dialogue. And because when I'm running a turnaround or any business, I don't really care if it's a turnaround, but I will, you know, I'll get to that point of very open communication, and that then creates an agile thinking business, Nick. But it's quite difficult to manage because you've got a lot of conflict's the wrong word, but you've got a lot of disagreement, Nick, right? And that's actually what good looks like. And yet, if you think about the recruitment process, everyone's trying to recruit to fit in the sausage machine that don't agree. When in fact, if you take you and I are pretty common in many ways, but actually there's a lot of things we won't agree on. And actually, it's very important that we do have that discussion. And when I listen to technology discussions on the House of Lords thing, or ethics, AI and ethics, or whatever these forums are, there's no one disagreeing, Nick, and it's just very unhealthy. And that's because of these mantras, and it's becoming aware of these things that and this is actually why emotional intelligence is so important.
Yeah, and I'd imagine that it's not just the leaders of the business who sort of welcome your presence on helping navigate this. It's actually the team members, right?
Yeah.
Who, because you're creating a safe space for actually understanding the real problems, knowing there's a lot of egos, right? There's a lot that, you know, the blame culture is incessant, right?
Yeah.
And being in an environment where you can get the facts out on the table without people feeling their jobs are on the line. And look,
Yeah.
I'm sure there are moments where the blame is so big, sadly it's, that person has to be accountable. But the majority of the times, allowing those team members to know there's a safe environment just to help solve the problem must be a relief to everyone rather than just the senior management.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's two things with this. One is it's very stressful. And I think a lot of people find themselves in an organization to have misaligned actions and beliefs, Nick. Okay. Very stressful to, through mantras to be forced to do something. And that really undermines people's integrity. So by speaking out and encouraging people to take action on what they're saying, that sorts that out. And it's an incredible relief for people. And I think that's the foundation really of getting people back on track. And the second thing this does, it also creates an environment where the right people start to thrive, because there's I find actually the people who really care can get really downtrodden, Nick, and you need those people and they can be very, very silent, amazingly enough. And somehow in this process, I identify who those people are. I give them opportunities. It's just incredible to see what happens. And the politicians tend to drop back, Nick, who've been saying all the right things and very clever with their language. But actually then the right people come to the fore and the business starts taking off. And yes, you're right. It is then time to exit some people sometimes, or to move people into the right roles. But there are very few people who actually argue with that process, because it's very fair and it's very open, Nick, and it's self-evident. It's not, it's like a flower coming out. You can't argue that a flower is wrong,
Yeah.
It's pretty obvious. So it's
is most of it out in the open, or because you see it in a lot of businesses where there are some big egos, big powerful voices, and sometimes those quieter voices just don't speak up, right? So are there times where you separate people to ensure everyone is speaking, or is it usually all in an open forum?
Yeah, no, really good question. I think, well, if I answer it in a different way, okay. If you who's actually talking about Bitcoin being a fraud, right? Who's actually talking about well, put it another way, everyone's talking about climate change, right? But 3.5% of climate change is inevitable, Nick. No matter what we do, 3.5% of climate change is inevitable. The Paris Climate Change Accord, right, only makes quarter of a degree difference, okay? And everyone's thinking that's going to save the planet. It's not, tragically, right? And yet we've given China know this, okay? And we've let China do what they like till 2060, and this is an example of something where we're not getting to the facts, Nick, right? So there's a massive amount of energy in terms of sustainability which has to happen, right? But actually the climate, well, there's a consumption aspect to it and a climate change aspect to it, but actually that is not in the overall course of, it's not the only horse to back in that situation. And in fact, it's an example of where people are not getting to the facts, Nick, even though you've got all of those brilliant people and Greta Thunberg. But this is where, in this environment where really you can actually fire people up by talking about existential things, which people will go into fight mode or flight mode, and very unhealthy binary thinking, which prevents getting to a sensible conclusion. So the tragedy is, and again, the reason why I'm saying that, who's actually talking about the real threat in China? Who's actually talking about, how many CEOs are stopping technology, right? Which is patently, obviously, harming well-being. I just had a chat with a friend of mine today, and it's a local bloke, and there's people who committed suicide, several people in my daughter's school. And he was talking about people that he knew in his local school, exactly the same situation. These are 14-year-old children, Nick, and our children are getting shattered, and everybody knows, but everyone's talking about implementing technology rather than actually restraining and getting a grip on this situation. So this is where people are not speaking up, Nick, which comes back to the same thing. It's about what's stopping people speaking up? It's these mantras. It's AI is good. It's technology is the future. It's all this stuff. Well, in fact, it's simply not.
Yeah, I think that's pretty powerful, actually, on what people's, as you said, some of the generalizations around all of those topics, meaning it's hard to sort of even challenge it because it's so general.
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
where you just can't engage in any kind of thoughtful discussion.
Yeah,
because it's so wide open and not getting into the detail of it there. Tom, that is incredibly insightful. Thank you for today. For everyone at home, the community fires in questions they want us to address. And if you want us to expand on resolving conflict, how you can actually look at giving everyone a voice in a business, helping any kind of turnaround or progression process in your business, then please do reach out. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you navigate some of the interesting challenges that we're all facing at the moment across our teams, businesses, and organizations. So, Tom, thank you for your time again today. It was great fun, as always, and looking forward to another one very soon. All the best. Bye.